His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Sahid, the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, fellow leaders, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinguished honor and pleasure on my own behalf and that of my 8 million plus people and government to join other global leaders in addressing the General Assembly today. I also take this time to extend our condolences to the families in your countries, including my own country, who have lost loved ones due to COVID-19, and our get well wishes to those who are sick. I also pay tribute to the global frontline workers and service personnel who have toiled over and beyond the call of duties to care for those who are sick and vulnerable, especially our medical workers. Mr. President, this being my first attendance at this global forum, I am greatly humbled and warmly congratulate you and the government and people of the Republic of Maldives on your mandate, particularly as a small island developing state, to lead our collective work this session. This is compounded by the intensifying and worrisome global climate crisis, accelerated by biodiversity losses and other humanitarian, peace, security, and trade-related issues that poses great challenges to the way we now manage our regional and global and socio-economic affairs. Despite all these challenges, we are heartened by your foresight, commitment and leadership under your Presidency of Hope, Vision and TAM. We pledge our total support to you and offer our partnership during your tenureship as President of this August Forum. Mr. President, I also thank your predecessor, His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkır, and the delegation of Turkey for his excellent leadership and outstanding work this past year, under, of course, very challenging circumstances. We wish him and his family all the very best. I want to place on record Papua New Guinea's deep appreciation and support to our friend, the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Guterres, for his continuing bold and decisive leadership of work for our United Nations in as far as the United Nations mandate and charter is concerned. Mr. Secretary General, your unanimous reappointment for another term starting next year is indeed a clear demonstration of the confidence and trust the United Nations member states, including my own country, have in your work ethics, your strong leadership, which this organization needs at this very challenging period. I thank you for your frank and sobering assessment of the challenges before us and your proposals on how we confront these challenges practically and at multilateral levels. Mr. President, I bring to you all greetings from Papua New Guinea in the blue, peaceful Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean, or the blue Pacific continent, is home to marine and terrestrial biodiversity and is where the most vulnerable small island states are being exposed to the global threats of rise in sea level due to climate change and the health and the associated economic woes brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. I speak for Papua New Guinea, of course, but the issues will no doubt resonate with the small island states, including those of my Pacific brothers and sisters. I also believe, Mr. President, that you too will have some appreciation on what these issues are, because you come from a small island state yourself. Our ocean homes and our way of life is intertwined with the coastal ecosystem in its nature by human influence. And for us, small island states, not in our making. But we are the first victims and the most affected because of our inherent vulnerabilities. Mr. President, as we convene and continue to speak on climate change in the ambiences of our 21st century, post-halls like this August United Nations Assembly, may I remind us all that little children and their families who are living in the seas of earth are living in fear and uncertainty of what their future will be like. This is because in their lifetime they have seen their arable and safe lands lost due to sea level rise and are watching as the structures that their lives are built upon slips away. It is time the big carbon emitters of planet Earth own up and apologize to small island states and all other victims of climate change. And I make this statement with no apologies. And today I make a call for all of us, and especially to the big carbon-emitting nations who are now enjoying their national economic transformations through industrialization, to pause, think, and take responsibility to save our planet. I am comforted by the recent commitment by President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Boris Johnson on the respective nations' intention to respond better to tackling climate change issues. Mr. President, I also hear of China's positive response and note that it is good we are now uniting to save our planet. We have a collective responsibility to take actions to save Earth. Mr. President, when astronaut Neil Armstrong walked on the moon on July 20, 1969, he would have looked back to the direction where he came from. And I assume that he would not have seen his beloved home state, the United States of America. He would have seen his home planet, planet Earth. It is the survival of Earth that we must now take action. I want to make this statement: enough of talk. We have to take actions commensurate to the volume of emissions from our industries. Leaders of the big carbon-emitting nations must now lead the global effort in rebalancing the environmental equilibrium. It is a hard ask, but really a necessary call for leadership and champions. I point to all nations on earth to embrace the unity of humanity to save our planet, because what happens in Africa will and does affect Europe. Whatever happens in Asia will affect America, and whatever happens in the Middle East will affect those of us in the Pacific, and vice versa. We live in one planet, one atmospheric envelope, one interlinked environmental ecosystem. Hence, as one humanity, we must rise and unite to preserve our one planet, our home. Not to do so is foolishness, and we are doing so at the peril of our children and their children, if, of course, Jesus Christ doesn't come back soon. Mr. President, Papua New Guinea recognizes the need to save Earth, and we too are contributing and will contribute to preserve our Earth. God has blessed Papua New Guinea with about 13% of world's tropical rainforest and 6% of its biodiversity. These global assets we want to preserve. One lesson I have learned from the COVID-19 experience is that oxygen is number one human need. With less oxygen, and COVID-19 has shown us that, an individual suffocates and dies. Well, you ask this question: who produced the oxygen for Mother Earth? The trees, of course. If the world's rainforest reservoir were a global lung, we in Papua New Guinea have a significant proportion of this organ that keeps the world breathing. We also function as a great carbon sink. We have this significant asset for our planet. And I, as chair of the Coalition of Rainforest Nations, Papua New Guinea stands at an important crossroad we are a net remover of the carbon from the atmosphere. The removal capacity from our forests is over 100 million tons per year. Our energy emissions at present is really around 10 million a year. Therefore, if the REID plus mechanisms delivers as it should be, Papua New Guinea can remain where every country needs to be by 2050 under the Paris Agreement, a net remover of carbon from the atmosphere. The preservation and conservation plus sustainable harvest and use of forest resources can be our commitment to you all for the upkeep of Earth, heading the red code humanity that was called by our good Secretary General Guterres. The recent Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change Sixth Assessment Report is crystal clear that human actions are the cause of the worsening climate crisis. We must take action to change this trajectory. We have long said that climate change is serious, it's a very serious existential threat to our national security and well-being. Therefore, the climate security nexus reality must and cannot continue to be denied by the Security Council, as it would be dereliction of duty to all people worldwide on the part of the Council. We welcome the increasing support of the Council on this important agenda. Mr. President, let me also welcome and commend the excellent leadership and efforts by the United Kingdom as COP26 President-designate, Italy also as the co-host of COP26, and the United Nations Secretary General in rallying the international community to take bold decisions and practical measures necessary to deliver on the Paris Agreement commitments. I cannot overstate the urgency and the ambitious actions needed under the Paris Agreement to undo the serious damage humanity has caused to planet Earth. I will also continue to advocate strongly that responsibility must be assigned correctly, appropriately, and proportionately to the scale of damages done. Mr. President, during COP26, I will be seeking to progress a number of issues on behalf of Papua New Guinea and the wider Pacific Blue economy. We must all commit to the energy targets, deal with the land use, and advocate for the preservation of biodiversity and be more bold in climate financing commitments. These issues, which are important to Papua New Guinea and the Pacific Island Forum countries, and we will be seeking support and advocacy from developed and industrialized countries to back our domestic and regional efforts towards adaptation and mitigation through global funding assistance. I will be seeking an understanding to build a special set of criteria that is simplified to enable us to qualify for financial support for adaptation and mitigation strategies. Mr. President, I join the previous speakers in calling on the international community to collectively meet our Paris Agreement obligations and submit individual, nationally determined contributions without delay. Papua New Guinea was amongst the first countries to submit our NDC in 2020, outlining our goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. This plan includes drafting of our NDC plans, implementation plan regulation and alignment of NDC adaptation and the National Adaptation Plan, thanks to the support we received from the United Nations Development Programme. We want to see our major carbon emitters in the industrialized nations to be very genuine and committed in their actions to fund climate change mitigation and adaptation. Our failure in that regard is a denial of that responsibility. We wish to advocate also that the $100 billion annual commitment by developed countries to the developing nations on climate financing must be considered different from official development assistance. This will allow its guidelines to be sensitive to the climate change mitigation and adoption agenda and their specific requirement. For Papua New Guinea as a natural gas and oil exporting country, we are working towards ensuring our carbon footprints is minimized by implementing our Sustainable Development Goal 13, Roadmap 2020 to 2030 on climate change, launched last year. However, despite the multiple project submissions for climate financing, Mr. President, Papua New Guinea has had little or limited success in accessing these funds, except for technical assistance in developing the fiduciary framework. This is quite disappointing, Mr. President. We need to see a more practical demonstration of genuine commitments. Other forms of assistance towards climate change adaptation and mitigation must also be streamlined to lessen the increasing debt burdens in small island states to free up the required fiscal space to support the economic recovery efforts from the COVID-19 pandemic and achieve sustainable development. I've had a call on member states to finalize a robust and fair carbon markets under the Paris rulebook to unlock a new financing stream that better accounts for the sustainable development interests of countries like my own. This will allow us to assign our development agenda under the different but appropriate financing opportunities, as long as the guidelines are appropriate but friendly to us. Mr. President, Papua New Guinea wants to achieve both conservation and development. In forestry, we have ceased issuance of new timber permits and renewal of existing ones, and will achieve complete round log export ban by 2025. We want to move into value adding and downstream processing. We have adopted and designated a large conservation area in one of our provinces, Northern Province to be exact, as a pilot program in partnership with a regional environmental program, which will give us the learning experience we need for further designations of conservation areas. We are also in the process of establishing NDC roadmap for agriculture, forestry, and other land use and energy sector. Mr. President, COVID-19 will continue to remain our biggest challenge. Our numbers are low in terms of both confirmed cases and fatalities at the moment. And one of the most concerning for us in Papua New Guinea is the rate of vaccinations, which is quite low. Our government took up necessary upfront ownership through the enactment of an appropriate legislation in our national parliament, which we call the National Pandemic Act in 2020. This, together with very close working partnership with our valued development partners, including our Pacific family of nations through the Pacific Humanitarian Pathway on COVID-19 program, has given us much success. We cannot speak highly enough of such partnerships, including those through the COVAX facility and with the United Nations system, Australia, New Zealand, USA, Japan, China, European Union, UK, and the United Arab Emirates, which enable us to have immediate access to essential medical equipment and supplies, including the AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccines. We continue to welcome and encourage further strengthening of cooperative global efforts to allow access to the COVID-19 vaccines in countries where they are most needed. We advocate for global efforts in curbing misinformation that has resulted in low rates of vaccinations in our country, especially the Facebook misinformations that keep on going on in public space. It will truly support our efforts in building national advocacy and awareness in the efficacy and safety of COVID-19 vaccines, a program ably supported by our development partners, including mostly notable the churches and the United Nations Country Office. We have to do all of that while keeping a very close eye on the general health sector of our country, because we cannot afford to lose sight of the other aspects of health in our country. Our National Health Plan is ready to be launched, except for the settlement of the financing plan that matches our health plan. It will encompass facility development, capacity building, pharmaceutical procurement, and development of primary, secondary, and tertiary healthcare, as well as building up provincial capacities and the requisite capacity building and education in as far as the health sector is concerned. Mr. President, economic management for us involves taking stock of where we were and building the right structures for re-engagement with our international partners. and ensuring that right enablers are put in place to build and sustain a robust economy. It involves taking stock of our debt portfolios, reprioritizing our expenditures, and focusing on important reforms in the utility sector, infrastructure, education, health, and of course, our natural resources. It also involved taking a closer look at specific projects in the extractive industry and working with the proponents to see them come on stream. And for the last 2 years, the bulk of our effort was to ensure that we achieved really a fine balance between the adherence to our COVID-19 protocols and requirements, but at the same time trying to find a balance between ensuring that our economy was opened and was functioning. Our work in the transparent stocktake of our debt portfolios have resulted in attracting strong support from the World Bank, from the IMF, and has provided important platform for support from our bilateral partners like Australia and Japan, and for this we are truly very, very grateful. We acknowledge the support to us at this important time when COVID has hit us and our economy is struggling. We continue to advocate for the use of our natural resources, but the foundational tenet is that the development of these resources are to be done on the premises that all stakeholders have a shared interest in these developments. And these interests are to be fully satisfied within principles of equity and equality, where we leave no one behind, especially a country like mine, which has many different ethnicities that own a parcel of land in our country. A key area of focus is the substantive investment and development of quality economic infrastructures to link the provinces throughout my country and deliver important services to all our citizens countrywide and enhance their socio-economic opportunities. We have embarked on a very important Connect PNG program, which is trying to connect a rural Papua New Guinea together into one another, which is building and expanding key infrastructure and assets such as national roads, wharves, jetties, airports, airstrips, and punching new road corridors and information and telecommunication network and electricity access to the majority of our population. This is the stimulus for economic transformation of our people. This is done as required by our national constitution, and for those who might need to know, Papua New Guinea was only independent as late as 1975. And this is totally in alignment with our National 8-Point Plan, our PNG Vision 2050, our Development Strategic Plan 2010 to 2030, our Medium-Term Plan 3, 2018 to 2022, and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to better deliver socio-economic prosperity for the country. And we hope by this we would become a middle-income earning country by 2050. Mr. President, road for PNG continues to be off at the back of our petroleum and energy and the mining sector, which contributes around 60% of our gross domestic product. We continue to advocate for these developments to take place and do as much as we can and as hard as we can to advocate for important policies in those sectors. Our policies on developments in the extractive sector has begun to be cognizant of the diminishing financing envelope from external sources such as loans and grants. At the same time, we have had to move towards better management of our national public debt. We strongly recognize the importance of generating sufficient revenue from our own domestic sources to complement external budget support for our national development priorities. As you would know, Mr. President, the General Assembly 2030 Agenda and the Addis Ababa Financing Development Framework calls for such. And it is in this spirit that my government has embarked on reviewing and reforming our legislation and policies in the resource sector to ensure appropriate levels of national content in projects and facilitate fair and equitable returns for all stakeholders with shared interests. At the same time, we continue to value and respect and uphold our partnership obligations with the private sector in our natural resource sector. And Mr. President, may I say we remain open for business and therefore welcome bona fide international investors to join us in exploring opportunities that are still available in my country. Mr. President, my country continues to enjoy partnership with important multilateral financial institutions. Let me take a moment to thank the World Bank. I thank IMF, I thank ADB, and of course our valued bilateral partners, including Australia, New Zealand, Japan, China, India, European Union, the United States, for supporting my government's development priorities. It would be remiss of me not to also acknowledge the excellent work undertaken under the leadership of the Prime Ministers of Canada and Jamaica and the United Nations Secretary General for financing for development needed particularly in developing countries to recover and build back from the COVID-19 pandemic. Our call Papua New Guinea strongly supports. Mr. President, my government has prioritized investing in the agricultural sector as an engine of economic growth and prosperity for our country. The strategic interventions are a combination of credit schemes that we've engaged upon, freight and price subsidy for our rural farmers, which has helped broaden the scope and reach the agricultural production sites in our country. This will not only help broaden the tax base and generate additional revenue the country needs for development, but also, more importantly, improve our rural communities and their livelihood and enable them to be proactive in as far as our nation building is concerned. Our largely rural-based economy is dependent on subsistence agriculture. It is my government's desire to transform the agriculture sector into a reliable, commercial and sustainable food system that will address food security and climate resilience, as well as conservation and management of our vast biodiversity. To support this, we have set targets to increase cash crop production by 30% and also increase livestock production by 30% by 2025 and develop taxation incentives for our local farmers. Additionally, this includes the formulation of an agriculture and livestock diversification plan by 2025 and our efforts to increase downstream processing by 30% in 2025 and ensure local landowners and provincial governments participate in the equity sharing and downstream business and the spin-offs that are associated with it. Mr. President, our efforts in the agricultural sector ties in well with the important global efforts under the United Nations Food System Summit convened virtually yesterday by the United Nations Secretary General. For Papua New Guinea, we have identified 5 key priority actions that forms our national pathway to transform our food systems in ways that will build a sustainable, equitable, resilient and healthier food system in our country. These details were shared in our national statement at the Food System Summit yesterday evening. However, I would underline that my country, with its arable and abundant land, has the potential to serve as a food basket for Asia-Pacific region and beyond, particularly at a time when food security around the world is now being threatened by the ravages of climate change, sea level rise, and the other crises. We therefore welcome multi-stakeholder partnership and investment to transform our organic food systems to address the global challenges relating to hunger, poverty, malnutrition, food security that fosters better health outcomes for our people and the communities and to deliver on the SDGs. Mr. President, in the energy sector, we recognize the importance of energy transition to renewable sources to move significantly away from fossil fuels and to options including hydro, solar, wind, and geothermal energy. We also have options to clean gas energy. Our government has, since 2018, under the auspices of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, we have been working with our development partners, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and USA to be exact, on the Papua New Guinea electrification program. This is intended to provide reliable and affordable renewable energy to over 70% of the unreached households in our country by 2030. Enormous development outcomes right on this program for our people. We have struck partnership with the International Solar Alliance and International Renewable Energy Agency And let me also say our private sector has come on board, the Fortescue Metal Group, the subsidiary, the Fortescue Future Industries, to strengthen our renewable energy transformation options in geothermal and hydropower energy space. Our energy transformation will come about when the National Energy Authority is fully established. It is a very strategic act we took on early this year to separate the regulatories from the responsibilities from the generation of power, and we hope that in the not too distant future, this authority of ours will regulate the energy space to allow for facilitate more investments and developments into the different energy, especially the clean energy sources that we advocate. Mr. President, we want to recapitalize on the energy space and to ensure that clean energy becomes Papua New Guinea's main driving force. Mr. President, the virtual first ever high-level dialogue on energy convened today by yourself or the Secretary General to accelerate efforts in implementing the SDG 7 on energy-related goals and targets for sustainable development is the most timely and needed in as far as Papua New Guinea is concerned. It resonates very well with my government development priority, and we look forward to harnessing the 10-year action plan under the global roadmap to attain SDG 7 by 2030 and further explore joining an energy compact to support SDG 7 achievement by 2030, emissions by the year 2050. Mr. President, as a maritime nation with a maritime zone spanning over 2.4 million square kilometers, the ocean agenda is of immense importance to my country, and not only for the living and non-living resources, but for the value added they bring to our national assets, but also more importantly for our own identity and our own way of life as a people and nation of the seas. My government is also prioritizing and strengthening the management, the governance and security of our maritime zones under our National Oceans Policy 2020 to 2030, which was adopted in July 2020. To further complement this, my government also officially launched last year our 10-year National Fisheries Strategic Plan 2021 to 2020, which provides the roadmap and vision for a broad-based fisheries sector and industry that is inclusive and environmentally sustainable and globally competitive and promotes food security. Furthermore, it addresses issues including prevention of illegal and unreported and unregulated fishing in our country and the neighboring Pacific waters. And it also talks about domestic downstream processing that enables our people as resource owners to be meaningfully involved in the economic opportunities our sea resources brings. We call on countries within our region to be responsible in that regard. Mr. President, I am pleased to say that my government adopted and launched the country's Marine Protected Areas Policy and the National Action Plan of Action for stingrays, skates and sharks in June 2021. This policy will strengthen our efforts to better protect our marine resources because we are an epicenter for global marine resource and biodiversity. We are grateful for the support from the Global Environmental Facility and UNDP as valued development partners. In doing so, this will assist us to reach the biodiversity Aichi Target 11 to have 17% of our terrestrial and inland water areas and 10% of our coastal and marine areas protected, which we remain committed to. It is in this context, and also with the devastating wildfires and catastrophic climate change events around the world impacting adversely on biodiversity, that we look forward to a successful outcome of the 15th Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity that will be staged in China next month. We therefore join the growing global call for an ambitious and transformational post-2020 global biodiversity framework that can help us implement fully our national commitments to protect biodiversity and sustainably use them for our sustainable development and also meeting the SDGs. Mr. President, regionally, I am pleased to join my fellow leaders of the Pacific Island Forum in heralding our milestone regional declaration on preserving our maritime zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise, which was adopted last month. As large states within our blue Pacific continent and the advent of the devastation consequences of the runaway climate change and the rising sea level rise that continues to threaten our countries and the people's security and lives and livelihoods and sovereignty, this declaration preserves our maritime zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. It also upholds the integrity of our long-standing commitment to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas as the global legal framework within which all activities in the oceans and seas must be carried out. We therefore welcome the support of all United Nations member states and the international community to our landmark declaration. My earlier remark on climate change gives us the basis to call for those support and actions. Mr. President, in terms of peace building, my government recognizes the fundamental role the United Nations plays in supporting sustainable development and peace building. It is therefore incumbent on the United Nations to ensure that we continue to adopt the existing multilateral arrangements, including the United Nations Peace Building Architecture, the Security Council, the Peace Building Commissions, and the Secretary General's Action for Peace Initiative and the Peace Building Fund to make them relevant under evolving global circumstances to better foster and sustain global, regional, national peace and security. For us, our continuing engagements with the Peace Building Commission and the Secretary General's Peace Building Fund in recent years, and from which we have been beneficiary, further strengthens the hand of national peace and security through peace by peaceful means. This is especially true on our Bougainville Peace Agreement process for our Bougainville region and in the new initiative on peace building and sustaining peace in our two other provinces in my country. Mr. President, I am pleased to announce the Bougainville peace process continues to remain a top priority of my government. In this context, I would like to inform this August Hall that following the referendum in 2019, my government and the autonomous Bougainville government have held the second post-referendum consultation and the joint supervisory board just 3 months ago, where several very important decisions to move the peace process forward were agreed upon. This included the reaffirmation of both parties to our commitment to the Bougainville Peace Agreement, the importance of a peaceful dialogue on the way forward, guided by the country's constitutional and parliamentary processes, including the respect to the outcome of the 2019 referendum, which includes the agreement to transfer all agreed powers and a joint roadmap to guide the post-referendum process. Mr. President, there is a clear recognition by both parties that much more work remains to be done in this critical phase, and that constructive dialogue, our mutual understanding and partnership is crucial for a lasting political settlement to the autonomous region of Bougainville. And let me place on record my appreciation for United Nations in their help and leadership or assistance on the Bougainville issue that faces Papua New Guinea. My government is also realistic about the capacity challenges and successful peace building and in our efforts to sustaining peace. The continued support and partnership of the Peace Building Commission, the Secretary General's Peace Building Fund, and the wider United Nations system and other development partners will be vital to ensure dividends of peace is shared and becomes long-lasting. I do acknowledge the strong support by the United Nations in chairing the consultation process and the supporting initial engagement of a moderator for these talks to take place. I would also like to put on record our sincere appreciation to our valued bilateral and multilateral development partners, and again including Australia, European Union, Japan, China, Germany, Ireland, New Zealand, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the entire United Nations systems for their continuing commitment and support towards the Bougainville peace process and the recent initiative in the two provinces in the highlands part of our country to look forward to a better work with all development partners on this important priority that my government is undertaking. Whilst commenting on the United Nations on the peace effort in Papua New Guinea, I would also like to recall the Pacific Island Leaders Forum decision in 2019 and the outstanding visit by United Nations Human Rights Mechanism to address the alleged human rights concerns in our regional neighborhood. This visit is very important to ensure that the greater peoples of the region have peace within their respective sovereignties and their rights and cultural dignities are fully preserved and maintained. Mr. President, we also have long recognized that our sustainable development efforts will be in vain if we do not safeguard our women and girls in their human rights and preservation of the dignity and provide them opportunities to be equal development partners for nation building. This is why my government has prioritized gender equality and empowerment opportunities with policies, laws and strategies, and we have set in place, among others, the Gender-Based Violence Strategy from 2016 to 2025 and the Family Protection Act, and provided that this demographic segment of our economy specific economic opportunities to be engaged in entrepreneurial activities to empower our women and our girls. This initiative takes into account of all our international commitments and obligations under relevant international frameworks, notably the Beijing Platform for Action. We recognize that much work remains to be done, but we are determined and committed to do what is right for our women and our girls, as our country's future prosperity and security also depends on how we treat them today and into the future. This is clearly demonstrated recently by the groundswell of support to combat and end the scourge of gender-based violence in the country. I am pleased to note that this year my government, with the support of the parliamentarians to end gender-based violence, established by Partition Special Parliamentary Committee on Gender-Based Violence to inquire into gender-based violence in the country and propose recommendations and measures to combat and end the scourge of gender-based violences. A report of this important work has been tabled in Parliament and we are working towards implementing it. This will complement the work done under a European Union-led and United Nations supported Spotlight initiative for ending violence against women and children, which was jointly launched when the United Nations Deputy Secretary General Ms. Amina Mohammed in March of 2020 visited Port Moresby. I really want to thank Her Excellency for this visit. It was not only a visit to the capital city, but she did step out into rural Papua New Guinea. We are also embarking on the administrative measures for quotas for women representation in our national parliament. The inadequate representation of women in parliamentary is a continuing concern for us in Papua New Guinea. We are optimistic to set in motion this initiative at our next general election scheduled for July 2022. These are but some of the key issues my government is now working in our third cycle universal periodic review report to be presented to the Human Rights Council in November of 2021. Mr. President, before I conclude, I would like to reiterate our call on the General Assembly to do better in delivering on the reforms of the United Nations Security Council. This important organ, entrusted with the international community's peace and security, with its archaic representation and working methods, is in dire need of an overhaul to ensure it meets with today's reality. We are concerned that it has been nearly 12 long years now since the first round of the intergovernmental negotiations for the reforms of the Security Council, and the costs keep on escalating for countries like ours. Despite all the extensive efforts on the 5 agreed elements of the IGN package, it still does not have any formal status to this date. For my delegation, a single consolidated document now and not in the indeterminate feature is indeed needed for real negotiations to pave way for the reforms of the Security Council. The importance of this cannot be overstated. We reiterate our call on the fundamental point. I also recognize as I close the important reality check by the Secretary General Guterres in his call for action on the common agenda. The Secretary General's proposals and recommendations for call for a robust United Nations system, it has our full support. But we cannot progress the common agenda without dealing with a system that will carry it. And I thank you, Mr. President, for giving me an opportunity to speak. Under your presidency, we hope our planet can be a place and a better place for all. We have a hope that no one will be left behind. God bless you all. God bless our planet, planet Earth. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Minister for Bougainville Affairs of the independent state of Papua New Guinea for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Xavier Bettel, Prime Minister, Minister of State, Minister for Communications and Media, and Minister for Religious Affairs of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. May I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Xavier Bettel, Prime Minister, Minister of State, Minister for Communications and Media, and Minister for Religious Affairs of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. I invite him to address the General Assembly.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I must say that I'm particularly moved to be speaking to you here today. I recall that last year we all had to speak to each other through computer screens, unable to interact and be unable to react. And in my message, I expressed the hope that we would soon be able to see each other in person. We are doing that now, even if it is in hybrid mode, but we are seeing each other. We're coming closer together. And if we are now able to speak from this rostrum, it is thanks to the devotion, the perseverance, and the ingenuity of all of those who have worked tirelessly over the past year and a half to stem, slowly but surely, the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm referring to the scientists, the researchers, the doctors, the healthcare personnel, and all of those who made it possible for us to survive. And who could have known 12 months ago that many effective vaccines against the coronavirus would have been developed so quickly so that we could get together. New York, which was hard hit by the pandemic, this week has yet again become the capital for multilateral diplomacy and action. However, we do note that many statements are being delivered by video and events are taking place virtually. So that's proof that we will not be returning to the pre-COVID conditions anytime soon. We all know full well the pandemic is dragging on and its socioeconomic impact is still being felt by all of our peoples. 4.5 million people have succumbed to the virus. 124 million people have now been plunged into extreme poverty. School children have lost more than 1.8 billion hours of in-person learning due to the pandemic. Mr. President, I'll speak about hope a little later on, but education is part of the hope that many people have. So the pandemic has forced us to recognize the urgent need to change the way we do things, business as usual is no longer an option. We must bolster our collective action within the multilateral system with, of course, the United Nations at the very heart. Mr. President, Luxembourg congratulates you on your election, and you can count on the support of our delegation in carrying out your very important mandate, and I thank you very much for taking the time this morning to have an exchange with me and to allow me to speak about hope, which I will address a little later on in my statement. You determined the theme for this assembly should be one of hope, and I think that's a wise choice. It's a wise choice because today we hear news that gives us countless reasons to lose hope. The pandemic is ever present. We hear the statistics as soon as we get up in the morning, how many people have gone to hospital, how many people are sick. We have ongoing crises and conflicts. I'll just mention two of them, the crisis in Afghanistan, where the takeover of the country by the Taliban is jeopardizing progress achieved in the past 20 years in terms of democratic governance and development and human rights, in particular for Afghan women and girls. And what can be said of the climate crisis? Its devastating fallout has spared no country. This morning I spoke with you and I spoke with other colleagues about the climate crisis. It's one of very survival. We've faced severe weather events, tornadoes and flooding, but other countries are dealing with their very existence, and that will depend on the choices that we make here. So it would be irresponsible for us to resign ourselves to this fate, because we must have hope. There is reason to hope. Hope should inspire us to act and to respond. The time for blah blah is over. We must act and react. Hope springs eternal, as the saying goes, but in order to survive, we must breathe life into hope. If we don't have hope, people will stop believing in anything. We have to take concrete action which will allow for de facto solidarity, as Robert Schuman said in the Declaration on Rebuilding Europe. As political leaders, we must act together with determination to meet these global challenges together. The closure of borders, the building of walls, for example, we have to stop thinking of all of that. That's not the answer. We know that we do not have all the answers as governments. We must, in order to succeed, we must work together with private sector stakeholders, civil society, and our citizens, and in particular our youth, who are rightly worried about the decisions that we're taking today, or our non-action, if you will. They're worried about their future. Our Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has appealed to us to do just that, and I thank him for his action, and I renew my congratulations to him and my sincere wishes for success during his second mandate at the helm of our organization. In our common agenda, he has outlined our responsibilities, and I agree with him when he says that we're at a turning point in history. My country is a founding member of the UN, and for many years we've been committed to multilateralism and to world order based on the rule of law. And today my country is prepared to respond to the Secretary General's appeal to create a more robust, more effective, more inclusive, and more networked multilateral system. This is the only way to safeguard peace and security, sustainable development in all its aspects, including health, respect for the rule of law and human rights. The pandemic has forced us to make difficult choices, to act quickly, not always certain that we had the right response to tackle such unprecedented circumstances. We have all learned on the job. We realize that certain decisions should have been taken yesterday or the day before yesterday, and we have decisions that we need to take today. We are pleased to see that the scientific community has moved forward. When I spoke earlier about this self-centeredness, this the walls that we build, if every country were to keep that information just for their own country, how much we would miss in not having these changes. Of course, change is not easy, in particular if some countries around us are doing the opposite. Working with Belgium, France, and Germany, we called each other. We said, well, let's try this, let's do this, let's do that. We need to exchange. And we've been able to convince many more people to become vaccinated. We have some 75% of people over the age of 12 who are vaccinated in Luxembourg. More than 6 billion doses of the vaccine have been administered to date. That is an impressive figure. It's true, but it still falls far short. We need 11 billion doses to exceed the 70% threshold of vaccinated people worldwide in order to get beyond the most acute phase of the pandemic, because we are not yet safe from more contagious variants and mutations of the virus. They are frightening. And access to vaccines is not equal. The Secretary General has reminded us that if we do not tackle this issue now, we will never get out of it. We understand the importance of vaccine solidarity. Last year and this year, as a country, we contributed some €2 million to the COVAX mechanism for global access to COVID-19 vaccines. In July, my government decided we would share 350,000 doses of vaccine with partner developing countries in Africa and Asia. And on September 13th, the first batch was delivered. Luxembourg provided 56,000 doses of vaccine to Cape Verde, along with medical material to administer the vaccine through a European civil protection mechanism. We can still see the images in our mind when people didn't have enough ventilators. We could see these ventilators, the masks on the tarmacs of airports. We knew that we had to do something in order to get this material where it was needed. That's a very sad image to keep in our minds. We were able to buy ventilators enough so that we can share them with others. We've done so with India, Nepal, and Tunisia, and we're providing refrigerators for vaccine storage to Laos, Sudan, Burkina Faso, and Senegal. And we are continuing to provide international solidarity to combat the pandemic. Also, I had the opportunity to stress that point during the summit organized the day before yesterday by President Biden. I have every hope we'll overcome the pandemic if we work together, if we count on solidarity in science, and also if we're able to halt the spread of misinformation, which still exists, and it's fueled by social media, through social networks and through Facebook. That fuels anti-vaccine skepticism. There are many people who still have questions, who still have doubts, and we need to reassure them. We mustn't stigmatize them. We will not be able to vaccinate 100% of the people. There will always be people who do not want to be vaccinated, but for those who still have doubts, we should answer their questions and not put them in the corner. They must learn along with us. And today, in order to stem the spread of misinformation, we need to react. There's a role for the press to play. Fake news should not be leading the news media. We must have increased cooperation with other member states. And the independent panel established by the Director General of the WHO has made some useful recommendations in this area. Mr. President, 6 years ago, we concluded a historic agreement in Paris. As I said earlier, climate change since then has shown that we must make even greater contributions and go even further in implementing our commitments. We can't continue to make commitments and not follow through. If we remain on the current path, the temperature will rise 2.7 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. So we must limit global warming to 1.5 degrees over pre-industrial levels. This morning we had an exchange, Mr. President, about the fallout of global warming for some. Some countries tomorrow may not even exist. If the ice continues to melt, I have Belgium, France, I have other countries around me, but imagine if you come from a small country, if we don't all act together, your country could actually disappear. How would that be? I believe the European Union has made a strong commitment, and I'm very grateful for that. And we thank people who came to the Paris Agreement and who will continue to work. Some countries who no longer wish to be part of the Paris Agreement will that will be counteractive. All of those countries who have stayed with the Paris Agreement, thank you very much. It is important to reduce the net greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55%. And in Luxembourg, we now have a policy. We have more than doubled our renewable energy production over the past 5 years. We also must keep our word to developing countries and help them bolster their capacity to manage the effects of climate change. My country has decided to double its international climate financing, bringing it up to 200 million euros from 2021 to 2025. And I can tell you that for Luxembourg, this climate financing is above and beyond our official development aid, for which we continue to earmark at least 1% of our GDP. I've been a Prime Minister since 2013. Over the past 8 years, people have often said to me, do you think it's still worthwhile to maintain that 1% of our GDP? And I say yes. It's true that some people say, well, you have problems at home as well, but to cut aid to countries most in need, that would be selfish. Defending cooperation in your own countries and not sharing with others, wanting to help others, would be wrong. Mr. President, COP26 will take place soon in Glasgow. This will be a moment of truth, and I hope that we will all be there and will take decisions to safeguard the right of future generations to live in a healthy environment. When I speak about youth, UNICEF estimates that more than 1 billion children are exposed to climate shocks, President. The climate crisis is therefore also a crisis to the rights of the child. And in this context, my country is particularly proud to be a member of the School Meals Coalition, as I mentioned the day before yesterday at the UN Food Systems Summit. Effective school meal programs are an intelligent investment in future generations because they create opportunities, particularly for young girls and women. Human rights are put to the test every day due to the climate crisis and the pandemic, and also due to wars and conflicts which give rise to unconscionable crimes in Afghanistan, in the Sahel, in the Near East, Syria, Yemen, in Ethiopia. Promoting human rights nationally and internationally is a priority for us, and we want to continue to shoulder our responsibilities in this area, and that is why my country has submitted its candidacy to serve on the Human Rights Council from 2022 to 2024. This will be our first term as a member of the Council, and if we are honoured to be elected by this Assembly to the Human Rights Council during voting next month, I can assure you that my country will protect and promote the rights of all human beings in a spirit of dialogue and cooperation. We intend to work closely with the UN human rights mechanisms, and we are committed to hearing the voices of civil society, which is essential to the very functioning of the Council and the UN. We have 4 priorities which are reflected in our voluntary pledges and commitments. Firstly, supporting the rule of law, civic space, human rights defenders, and combating impunity. I reaffirm our support for the International Criminal Court and the follow-up and investigations mechanisms within the United Nations. Secondly, a human rights-based approach to sustainable development and climate action. We recognize the importance of the right to development, and our ambitious cooperation policies and climate action take account of the very strong link between the implementation of the Sustainable Development Programme by 2030, combating climate change, and respecting human rights worldwide. Thirdly, gender equality and combating all forms of discrimination. My country has a very strong policy on women. And as we discussed this morning, Mr. President, I'm sorry to keep recalling that, but we discussed a number of issues this morning. We are committed to ensuring their rights to the self-determination of women and girls. It's unfathomable today that men in some countries of the world think they know better than women do. If that's the reality of our world today, that's terrible. If a man thinks that he knows better and can make the decision for a woman. I'm speaking about health, education, sexual and reproductive rights. I think in 2021, it's really high time for us to make sure that every individual has the right to decide for him or herself. We are also working to protect the rights of LGBTI persons. Fourthly, we will continue to invest systematically in the rights of the child. Human rights are also human rights of migrants and refugees. Let us think for a moment about the people who were forced to flee Afghanistan, the journalists, the human rights defenders, judges, prosecutors, teachers, all of those who, because of their activities, whom we asked to be our partners, who are now directly threatened. We cannot leave them. Let's not let them down. They were our partners. They've been our partners. And I'm very pleased that the European Union will be holding a conference on resettling vulnerable Afghans at the request of Luxembourg primarily. That will be done in the coming months by the European Commission. We recognize that there are tensions between states, and there's a serious crisis of confidence. I'm not too reassured by hearing colleagues over the past few days. It's really up to us to create dialogue. We have to restore trust. We have to give hope to dialogue among countries and with the countries with whom we have contacts, so that we can avoid conflicts for not just future generations, but today's generation. Turning to the Secretary General's proposal to have a new contract, we are prepared to lend a helping hand to restore trust and respect for international law. And of course, we need to ensure lasting peace. We're also prepared to help reshape the United Nations to make it better able to play its pivotal role in multilateral cooperation. Change is never easy, but we must not resign ourselves to say, well, since it's too hard to do, let's do nothing. We support calls to improve the General Assembly and reform the Security Council to make it more representative, more effective, and more accountable to all member states. Mr. President, as I said, there is reason to hope. There's reason to persevere. Let's not give up. Let's act. Let's cooperate to overcome the challenges facing humanity. You know, I've never known war. I've never seen conflict. I'm part of that generation. On my continent, other individuals have not been so lucky. And we owe it to those who have given their lives defending values. There's an American cemetery full of American soldiers who didn't even know where Luxembourg is, but they died so that I could live in democracy today. We need to find solutions together today. We should not relive the past. We owe it to everyone. When I speak about hope today in 2021, hope is not the same for everyone. In some countries, some young people just hope to survive. For some, they hope to have an education. For some, they hope to have access to health care. Here, we are asking whether or not we should have a booster shot, and some people in other countries are asking whether or not they can get the first shot. Whether one is black or white, mixed race or Asian, that should not be an obstacle to social success. Is it too much to say, well, this is the way I'm born, shouldn't I have the same hopes as other people do? Is it normal? I should be able to practice my religion without fearing reprisals. I should have the right to be a transgender, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and not be forced to live a secret life because others have determined what is sexually appropriate. Is that too much to ask? If I'm Jewish, Muslim, Catholic, Hindu, Protestant, should I wonder whether or not I can practice my religion freely? Should I fear going into a mosque, into a church, into a synagogue? Hope today is something that depends on where a person is born, what a person's ethnic origin, skin color, sexuality. Mr. President, if I have one hope, it is that the hopes of mankind yesterday become the reality for future generations. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank Prime Minister, Minister of State, Minister for Communications and Media, and Minister for Religious Affairs of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan to introduce an address by the head of government.
Mr. President, I have the great honor to introduce a recorded statement by His Excellency Mr. Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, I congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the 76th session of the General Assembly. I also wish to express appreciation for the significant achievements of your predecessor, Volkan Bozkır, who guided the Assembly skillfully under the difficult circumstances imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. President, the world is facing triple challenge of the COVID-19, the accompanying economic crisis, and the threats posed by climate change. The virus does not discriminate between nations and people, nor do the catastrophes imposed by uncertain weather patterns. The common threats faced by us today not only expose the fragility of the international system, they also underscore the oneness of humanity. By the grace of Almighty Allah, Pakistan has been successful so far in containing the COVID pandemic. Our collaborated strategy of smart lockdowns helped save lives and livelihoods and kept the economy afloat. Over 15 million families survived through a social protection program of Asas. Mr. President, climate change is one of the primary existential threats that our planet faces today. Pakistan's contribution to global emissions is negligible, yet we are among the 10 most vulnerable countries to the effects of climate change in the world. Being fully aware of our global responsibilities, we have embarked upon game-changing environmental programs, reforesting Pakistan through our 10 billion tree tsunami, preserving natural habitats, switching to renewable energy, removing pollution from our cities, and adapting to the impacts of climate change. To address the triple crisis of COVID pandemic, economic downturn, and climate emergency, we need a comprehensive strategy that should include, number one, vaccine equity. Everyone, everywhere, must be vaccinated against COVID, and as soon as possible. Two, adequate financing must be made available to developing countries. This can be ensured through comprehensive debt restructuring, expanded ODA, redistribution of unutilized SDRs, and allotment of a greater proportion of SDRs to developing countries. And finally, provision of climate finance. Three, We must adopt clear investment strategies which help alleviate poverty, promote job creation, build sustainable infrastructure, and of course, bridge the digital divide. I propose that the Secretary General convene an SDG summit in 2025 to review and accelerate implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. President, because of the plunder of the developing world by their corrupt ruling elites, the gap between the rich and the poor countries is increasing at an alarming speed. Through this platform, I've been drawing the world's attention towards the scourge of illicit financial flows from developing countries. The Secretary General's high-level panel of financial accountability, transparency, and integrity, called the FACTI panel, has calculated that a staggering $7 trillion in stolen assets are parked in financial haven destinations. This organized theft and illegal transfer of assets has profound consequences for the developing nations. It depletes their already meager resources, accentuates the levels of poverty, especially when laundered money puts pressure on the currency and leads to its devaluation. At the current rate, when the FACTI panel estimates that $1 trillion every year is taken out of the developing world, there will be a mass exodus of economic migrants towards the richer nations. What the East India Company did to India, the crooked ruling elites are doing to the developing world, plundering the wealth and transferring it to Western capitals and offshore tax havens. And Mr. President, retrieving the stolen assets from the developed countries is impossible for poor nations. The rich countries have no incentives or compulsion to return this ill-gotten wealth. And this ill-gotten wealth belongs, remember, to the masses of the developing world. I foresee in the not-too-distant future, a time will come when the rich countries will be forced to build walls to keep out economic migrants from these poor countries. I fear a few wealthy islands in the sea of poverty will also turn into a global calamity like climate change. The General Assembly must take steps meaningfully to address this deeply disturbing and morally repugnant situation, naming and shaming the haven destinations and developing a comprehensive legal framework to halt and reverse the illicit financial flows are most critical actions to stop this great economic injustice. And at a minimum, the recommendations of the Secretary General's FACTI panel should be fully implemented. Mr. President, Islamophobia is another pernicious phenomenon that we all need to collectively combat. In the aftermath of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, terrorism has been associated with Islam by some quarters. This has increased the tendency of right-wing, xenophobic and violent nationalists, extremists and terrorist groups to target Muslims. The UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy has recognized these emerging threats. We hope the Secretary General's report will focus on these new threats of terrorism posed by Islamophobes and right-wing extremists. I call on the Secretary General to convene a global dialogue on countering the rise of Islamophobia. Our parallel efforts at the same time should be to promote interfaith harmony, and they should continue. Mr. President, the worst and most pervasive form of Islamophobia now rules India. The hate-filled, Hindutva ideology propagated by the fascist RSS BJP regime has unleashed a reign of fear and violence against India's 200 million Muslim strong community. Mob lynching by cow vigilantes, frequent pogroms such as the one in New Delhi last year, discriminatory citizenship laws to purge India of Muslims, and a campaign to destroy mosques across India and obliterate its Muslim heritage and history are all part of this criminal enterprise. New Delhi has also embarked on what it ominously calls the final solution for Jammu and Kashmir dispute. It has undertaken a series of illegal and unilateral measures in occupied Jammu and Kashmir since 5th August 2019. It has unleashed a reign of terror by an occupation force of 900,000. It has jailed senior Kashmiri leadership, imposed a clampdown on media and internet, violently suppressed peaceful protest, abducted 13,000 young Kashmiris and tortured hundreds of them. It has extrajudicially killed hundreds of innocent Kashmiris in fake encounters and imposed collective punishments by destroying entire neighborhoods and villages. We had unveiled a detailed dossier on gross and systematic violations of human rights by the Indian security forces in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This repression is accompanied by illegal efforts to change the demographic structure of the occupied territory and transform it from a Muslim majority into a Muslim minority. Indian actions violate the resolutions of the United Nations Security Council on Jammu and Kashmir. The resolutions clearly prescribe that the final disposition of the disputed territory should be decided by its people through a free and impartial plebiscite held under the UN auspices. India's action in occupied Jammu and Kashmir also violate international human rights and humanitarian laws, including the 4th Geneva Convention, and amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. It is unfortunate, very unfortunate, that the world's approach to violations of human rights lack even-handedness and even are selective. Geopolitical considerations or corporate interests, commercial interests, often compel major powers to overlook the transgressions of their affiliated countries. Such double standards, and the most glaring in case of India, where this RSS BJP regime is being allowed to get away with human rights abuses with complete immunity. The most recent example of Indian barbarity was the forcible snatching of the mortal remains of the great Kashmiri leader, Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, from his family, denying him a proper Islamic funeral and burial in accordance with his wishes and the Muslim tradition. Devoid of any legal or moral sanction, this action has been against the basic norms of human decency. I call on this General Assembly to demand that Sayyid Gilani's mortal remains be allowed to be buried in the cemetery of martyrs with the appropriate Islamic rites. Mr. President, Pakistan desires peace with India as with all its neighbors. But sustainable peace in South Asia is contingent upon resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute in accordance with the relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions and the wishes of the Kashmiri people. Last February, we reaffirmed the 2003 ceasefire understanding along the line of control. The hope was that it would lead to a rethink of the strategy in Delhi. Sadly, the BJP government has intensified repression in Kashmir and continues to vitiate the environment by these barbaric acts. The onus remains on India to create a conducive environment for meaningful and result-oriented engagement with Pakistan. And for that, it must do, number one, reverse its unilateral and illegal measures instituted since 5th August 2019. Secondly, stop its oppression and human rights violations against the people of Kashmir. And three, halt and reverse the demographic changes in the occupied territory. It is also essential to prevent another conflict between Pakistan and India. India's military buildup, development of advanced nuclear weapons, and acquisition of destabilizing conventional capabilities can erode mutual deterrence between the two countries. And now, Mr. President, I want to talk about Afghanistan. The current situation in Afghanistan, for some reason, Pakistan has been blamed for the turn of events by politicians in the United States and some politicians in Europe. From this platform, I want them all to know the country that suffered the most, apart from Afghanistan, was Pakistan when we joined the US war on terror after 9/11. 80,000 Pakistanis died. $150 billion was lost to our economy. There were 3.5 million internally displaced Pakistanis. And why did this happen? In the 80s, Pakistan was a frontline state in fighting against the occupation of Afghanistan. Pakistan and the United States trained Mujahideen groups to fight for the liberation of Afghanistan. Amongst those Mujahideen groups were Al-Qaeda, were various groups from all over the world. There were Mujahideen, Afghan Mujahideen. These were considered heroes. President Ronald Reagan invited them to White House in 1983. And according to news items, he compared them to the founding fathers of the United States. They were heroes. Come 1989, the Soviets leave. So do the Americans, abandon Afghanistan. Pakistan was left with 5 million Afghan refugees. We were left with sectarian militant groups which never existed before. But the worst cut of it was that a year later, Pakistan was sanctioned by the US. We felt used. Fast forward 9/11, Pakistan is needed again by the US because now their US-led coalition is now invading Afghanistan, and it could not happen without Pakistan providing all the logistical support. What happened after that? The same Mujahideen that we had trained that fighting foreign occupation was a sacred duty, a holy war or jihad, they turned against us. We were called collaborators. They declared jihad on us. Then all along the tribal belt bordering Afghanistan, the Pakistan semi-autonomous tribal belt, where no Pakistan army had been since our independence, they had strong sympathies with the Taliban, Afghan Taliban, not because of their religious ideology, but because of Pashtun nationalism, which is very strong. Then there were 3 million Afghan refugees still in Pakistan, all Pashtuns, living in camps, 500,000, the biggest camp, 100,000 camps. They all had affinity and sympathies with the Afghan Taliban. So what happened? They too turned against Pakistan. For the first time, we had militant Taliban in Pakistan. And they too attacked Pakistan government. When our army went in the tribal areas for the first time in our history, whenever an army goes into civilian areas, there's collateral damage. So there was collateral damage, which multiplied the militants to seek revenge. But not just that. The world must know that in Pakistan, there were 480 drone attacks conducted by the US. 480 drone attacks. And we all know that drone attacks are not that precise. They cause more collateral damage than the militants they are targeting. So, who did the people whose relatives were being killed? Who did they seek revenge? Against Pakistan. Between 2004 and 2014, there were 50 different militant groups attacking the state of Pakistan. At one point, people like us were worried that will we survive this? There were bombs going all over Pakistan. Our capital was like a fortress. Had it not been for one of the most disciplined army in the world and one of the best intelligence agencies in the world, I think Pakistan would have gone down. So when we hear this at the end, there's a lot of worry about in the US about taking care of the people who helped them, the interpreters and everyone who helped the US. What about us? The only reason we suffered so much was because we became an ally of the US, of the coalition in the war against Afghanistan, where there were attacks being conducted from Afghan soil into Pakistan. At least there should have been a word of appreciation. But rather than appreciation, imagine how we feel when we are blamed for the turn of events in Afghanistan. After 2006, it became apparent to everyone who understood Afghanistan's history that there would be no military solution in Afghanistan. I went to the US, I spoke to think tanks, I met at the time Senator Biden, Senator John Kerry, Senator Harry Reid. I tried to explain to them that there would not be any military solution and political settlement was the way to go forward. No one understood then. And unfortunately, in trying to force a military solution is where US went wrong. And if today, the world needs to know why the Taliban are back in power, all the world has to do is do a deep analysis of why 300,000 well-equipped Afghan army, and remember, Afghans are one of the bravest nations on earth. Why did this 300,000 Afghan army give up without a fight? The moment a deep analysis of this is done, the world would know why the Taliban are back in power, and it's not because of Pakistan. So, Mr. President, right now, the whole world community should think, what is the way ahead? There are two paths we can take. If we neglect Afghanistan right now, according to the UN, half the people of Afghanistan are already vulnerable. And by next year, almost 90% of people in Afghanistan will go below the poverty line. There's a huge humanitarian crisis looming ahead. And this will have serious repercussions, not just for the neighbors of Afghanistan, but it will have repercussions everywhere if a destabilized, a chaotic Afghanistan again becomes a safe haven for international terrorists. The reason why the US came to Afghanistan in the first place. So therefore, there is only one way to go. We must strengthen this current government, stabilize it, for the sake of the people of Afghanistan. What have the Taliban promised? They will respect human rights. They will have an inclusive government. They will not allow this soil to be used by terrorists. And they have given amnesty. Now, if the world community incentivizes them, encourages them to walk this talk, it will be a win-win situation for everyone. Because these are the four things that in Doha, when the US was talking to the Taliban, these were the conditions the dialogue was all about. So if the world can incentivize them to go this direction, then after all, this 20-year of presence, of coalition presence in Afghanistan would not be wasted, because Afghan soil would not be used for international terrorism. So I end my talk, Mr. President, by urging everyone that this is a critical time for Afghanistan. You cannot waste time. Help is needed there. Humanitarian assistance has to be given there immediately. And the Secretary General of the United Nations has taken bold steps. I urge you to mobilize the international community and move in this direction. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan for the statement just made. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Irakli Garibashvili, Prime Minister of Georgia. May I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Irakli Garibashvili, Prime Minister of Georgia. I invite him to address the General Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, dear colleagues, dear friends. On behalf of the Georgian people, it is an honor to speak here at the United Nations General Assembly. The UN provides each member state a platform to voice concerns and share its views about the most pressing challenges and opportunities of our time. Today, I bring the same Georgian spirit of cooperation and global engagement that motivated our country to join the UN after restoring independence 30 years ago. While our democratic nation may be young, our values and traditions are deeply rooted. We have survived and thrived through many cycles of history over thousands of years. Our history has helped forge a tough, proud and resilient people, open to the world and finding our own way forward. Georgia is a diamond in the rough, still seeking to sharpen our edges to reveal the full potential of the nation. Situated at the crossroads of civilizations, where East meets West and North meets South, Georgia has always adjusted to meet new challenges at every turn in our past. I applaud the UN for going ahead with this General Assembly during a global pandemic. Rather than not meeting, we have acknowledged that a safe and responsible gathering is more important now than ever. The importance of this meeting cannot be understated. The world is still in a vicious fight against COVID-19, which has ravaged the globe and affected economies and livelihoods. As we continue our effort to build back better from the pandemic with a sense of unity, we have to come together to meet the needs of the world. Georgia is grateful to the United States, European Union, and China, as well as the vaccine producers, who provided vaccines to safeguard the health of the Georgian people. Working in a common purpose, we will put an end to the pandemic and get back to forging a better, brighter future for the entire world. I stand in front of you representing a country that is full of determination and faith. A country which is optimistic but always looks at its future through a pragmatic lens. I am proud of our membership in the UN and the work the UN does for humankind. I'm also very proud of my country and the work of the governing Georgian Dream Party to deliver a stronger democracy, a stronger economy, and a brighter future for our people. In bringing about the changes needed to keep pushing ahead, my government has a development plan, a clear vision for 2030 that aligns perfectly with the UN's 2030 agenda. We stand for a more sustainable environment, protecting the rights of all people, greater economic fairness and resilience, and a revitalized UN, among many other aspirations shared between Georgia and the United Nations. This sentiment of cooperation echoes the report of the Secretary General on our common agenda that outlines an ambitious plan for reinvigorated international cooperation and multilateralism. I believe this General Assembly should work on these recommendations in a determined and substantive way. Closer to home, Georgian dreams are becoming a reality. We have more than aspirations for the future. We aim to get the results our people demand today. Even with the deep setbacks from COVID-19, our economy is on the mend. Growth is surging. Jobs are being created, and we are once again one of the leading tourist destinations in the world. The world continues to recognize our democratic, economic, financial, and legal reforms. Some notable rankings demonstrate the spectacular strides Georgia has made to become one of the leading countries in the region and in promoting robust economic development. According to the World Bank, Georgia takes 7th position amongst 190 countries for ease of doing business. The Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom ranks us 12th amongst 184 countries. And according to the Fraser Institute's World Economic Freedom Ranking, Georgia ranks 5th out of 165 countries, an improvement of 3 steps in the last year. It is also important to note that great strides have also been made to advance anti-corruption measures, freedom of the press, and human rights. Earlier this week, we heard U.S. President Joseph Biden call for increased global cooperation to meet our largest challenges. In Georgia, we not only share this sentiment, but we have and always will step up to answer the call. We may be a small country, but we have made outsized contributions to international security, fighting alongside our allies against terrorism and organized crime around the globe. We did so in Afghanistan, where 32 brave soldiers gave their lives and numerous others were injured for the cause of freedom and peace. Recently, we provided a transportation and logistics hub for thousands of evacuees from Afghanistan and facilitated over 60 flights, while also accepting workers from many global NGOs and IFIs to temporarily work out of Georgia. These actions underscore our response to the call for cooperation with our partners and the results that can be achieved when we work together. This summer, Georgia, alongside our United States partners, laid the groundwork for the release of 15 Armenian detainees by Azerbaijan. At the same time, Armenia provided maps for mined territories to Azerbaijan. Our goal has always been to do what we can to support common action to advance the common good. All our advances have one simple goal in mind: European and Euro-Atlantic integration. We will not rest until we achieve EU and NATO membership. This means we will continue to reform and modernize every aspect of our democracy and economy to align with the highest global standards. Our path to European and Euro-Atlantic structures is a homecoming, a civilizational choice. An absolute majority of our population strongly supports this destiny for our country. Our historic decision to join the European and Euro-Atlantic family is the core principle that guides our foreign policy. Especially since 2012, Georgia has made great strides in advancing democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. All are fundamental values we share with the European institutions. We have prepared a comprehensive action plan, packed with initiatives and reforms that will lead to our application for EU membership in 2024. For that, I would like to thank our European and international partners that have shown strong and steadfast support to Georgia for all these years. Since 2012, we have held 6 democratic elections, and each one has been declared free and fair by international election observers. In fact, in a few days' time, we will once again be holding a free, fair, and democratic nationwide municipal election. Since the last time we met in person here at the UN, democracies around the world have been under pressure, if not assault. Irrational and, I would say, dark forces have been at work, often aided and abetted by outside saboteurs. Regardless of the source, we must hold to the democratic path. Elections are often passionate and hard-fought, and feelings run high. Yet when elections are free and fair, the winners must be gracious, and those who lose must abide by the will of the people. If we cannot believe in elections, then democracy itself is in peril. So I call on everyone here today who cares for democracy, for progress, for free and fair elections, to participate with passion in your political system. And when the dust has settled, as we say, and a winner is declared, respect the will of the people, close ranks, and work to move your country forward. The challenge to democracy is not the only challenge facing us. In Georgia, we have achieved much, but of course, more remains to be done. First and foremost, we must create more jobs. At the same time, we must remain dedicated to investing in education and infrastructure, eradicating poverty, strengthening our health system, and diversifying our industrial, service, and agricultural sectors. As I have outlined, Georgia is on the move. We are on the right track. We are overcoming COVID, and we have a long-term plan in place to strengthen our democracy, economy, and society. Yet I'm reaching out to you all today to put an end to the illegal occupation of Georgian sovereign lands by Russia. Not only is Russia occupying 20% of Georgian territory, but is also actively seeking to undermine our aspirations to join the European and Euro-Atlantic family. While our commitment to be a true global citizen is unstoppable and cannot be hindered by outside forces, the very freedom we have fought so hard for is being challenged every single day. On our very own soil, in the Abkhazia and Skin Valley regions, we are observing a humanitarian crisis. And the responsibility, of course, resides only with the occupying power. This year, the European Court for Human Rights ruled its verdict and found the Russian Federation guilty of occupying and exercising effective control over 2 Georgian regions and responsible for human rights violations in Abkhazia and Skin Valley. Today, I call on the international community to act in concert to address the violations of fundamental principles of international law in the occupied territories. and with joint efforts, facilitate the implementation of the EU-mediated August 2008 ceasefire agreement. Every day, Georgian land continues to be subject to, as we call it, creeping annexation and so-called borderization. This includes kidnappings, illegal detentions, unlawful restrictions on freedom of movement, and deprivation of the right to education in the native tongue, particularly in the Gali region. During COVID-19, this made the medical evacuations virtually impossible. All these actions carry an unbearable burden for those living on both sides of the razor-wired fences. This must be seen for what it is: a pre-planned ethnic cleansing to drive ethnic Georgians out. This must be stopped. In the occupied territories, we have a real humanitarian crisis, while on the other side, we have land that is being cultivated, where the younger generation have access to world-class education, top-level infrastructure, and thriving businesses. We want to see the same opportunities and prospects for development and prosperity for the young generation in the Abkhazia and Skhin Valley region. For this very reason, we developed a Step to a Better Future, a peace initiative to improve the livelihoods of people living in the Abkhazia and Skhin Valley regions. We believe that only through sustainable peace and security will our fellow citizens have a better future. It is through peace and stability that economies can start to thrive and our people prosper together. That is why I want to address our Abkhaz and Ossetian brothers and sisters and say that our true strength is in cooperation and unity, which is exactly why our foes want us divided and apart. We have a common history and are part of a common homeland, Sakartvelo. We should jointly define our common future as well. We should build our country together and peacefully turn it into a truly democratic, prosperous, and future-oriented European society. From a geopolitical perspective, the Black Sea region is growing ever more than important. The Black Sea is on the front lines of a dynamic regional chess match. It is a microcosm of conflict management. And I would say that if we can maintain peace and stability here, we can do so elsewhere. Therefore, our goal is to ensure peace and stability in the entire region. In the South Caucasus, I propose what I'm calling the Peaceful Neighborhood Initiative to promote stability in our region. This format will facilitate dialogue and confidence building and lead to the implementation of practical solutions to regional issues of common interest with our US and EU partners. Georgia stands ready to host an international gathering in Tbilisi to discuss the prospects of our Peaceful Neighborhood Initiative, involving our South Caucasian neighbors, our brothers, and international partners. Let's begin with some small steps to build trust, and then we can move toward resolving other regional and global issues together. A sustainable peace and a common strategic outlook for the South Caucasus will benefit the wider Black Sea region and enhance broader European and global security. Dear friends, let me conclude where I began. We are here today as a testament to the power of collective action. Whether it is the fight against the pandemic, financing development to advance quality of life, or the need of collective action to maintain peace, we must act together to live together, and there is no other alternative. I remain confident that working together, we will succeed. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of Georgia for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia to introduce an address by the head of government.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the high honour and distinct privilege to introduce the statement of the Honourable Scott Morrison MP, Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia.
Mr. President, it is a pleasure to give Australia's national statement to the General Assembly. Here in Canberra, I'm on the ancient land of the Ngunnawal people, one of Australia's many Indigenous peoples who have cared for this continent for 60,000 years. Our First Peoples remind us that caring for country and for each other is the essence of our shared humanity. The past year has been one of extraordinary adversity, as the world has struggled and dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic, and it continues to rage. Yet it has also borne witness to humanity's remarkable resilience and creative ability to overcome problems, to deliver solutions. Each generation navigates its own destiny amidst anxiety and hope. Ours is no different. Today, I would like to speak about three of the most pressing global challenges that together we face. Challenges that shape our times. Mr. President, COVID-19 has tested the world like nothing in our lifetime. We mourn the millions lost and millions more who have suffered such terrible illness. After so much heartache and so much sorrow, there is hope now and a way forward. The development of a safe and effective vaccines, so many of them, has been one of the greatest achievements of modern times. Our collective task, though, now is to roll that out, a global vaccine rollout, the largest in world history. Here in Australia, more than 70% of our adult population has had the first dose of the vaccine, and more than half will have had 2 doses. We know vaccinations work. They lower the risk of transmission. They significantly lower the risk of hospitalisation, severe illness and death. And high vaccination rates are the pathway to taking back so much of what we have lost and to living with this virus confidently, safely, securely and prosperously. Vaccinations are the key to keeping our neighbours safe also. Australia has been helping countries across our region battle this pandemic with personal protective equipment, testing equipment, medical personnel. And now we're doing everything we can to help them with access to safe and effective vaccines. None of us are safe unless all of us are safe. So this is the most urgent priority for Indo-Pacific nations. Already we've delivered more than 3 million doses to countries across our region, and millions more doses are on their way. We've also contributed $130 million to the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment, which has delivered over 51 million doses to Southeast Asia and 1.7 million doses to our Pacific family in Timor-Leste. And we're investing more than $620 million to procure millions of vaccine doses and providing technical advice, training of health workers and cold chain support to our friends and our neighbours. Now, this includes a $100 million contribution to the Quad vaccine partnership with our good friends the United States, India and Japan. This will support a boost in production by at least 1 billion doses by the end of 2022 and provide access to vaccines and delivery support to countries across the Indo-Pacific. This is the right thing to do. It will help slow the spread of the virus and, we hope, prevent variants emerging. As well, we must prevent future pandemics, and Australia supports the calls for a stronger, more independent World Health Organization with enhanced surveillance and pandemic response powers. This should be the duty of every single member of the World Health Organization to share that ambition for a World Health Organization that can seek to protect us all in these circumstances. And we also need to accelerate efforts to identify how COVID-19 first emerged. Australia called for an independent review and sees understanding the cause of this pandemic not as a political issue, but as being essential simply to prevent the next one. We need to know so we can prevent this death and this calamity being visited upon the world again. That can be our only motivation. Mr. President, COVID-19 has underscored the vital importance of international cooperation and coordination. The patterns of cooperation that have sustained our prosperity and security for decades, they're under increasing strain. And so are the institutions that have been helped maintain that rules-based international order for over 7 decades now. The global strategic environment has rapidly changed, indeed deteriorated in many respects, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region where we live here in Australia. The changes we face are many, whether it's tensions over territorial claims, there is rapid military modernisation, foreign interference, cyber threats, disinformation, and indeed economic coercion. Meeting these challenges requires cooperation and a common purpose amongst like-minded nations and all who share that purpose of peace, stability and security, to enhance these as the outcomes that benefit all peoples from wherever they come and whatever their perspectives. Australia's interests are inextricably linked to an open, inclusive and resilient Indo-Pacific, a region where the rights of all states, no matter how large or how small, are protected. This is what we believe. Australia continues to work constructively on this goal with agency and purpose and commitment, passionately building a network of partnerships and relationships that support these goals, contributing to. With our Pacific family, through the Pacific Islands Forum, with our ASEAN friends, very much at the heart of our own Indo-Pacific vision, through the Quad, with a practical agenda for peace, contribution and security in our region, with our many bilateral strategic partners, comprehensive strategic partners, and with our long-standing friends and allies, the United States and the United Kingdom. Strengthened, of course, further last week with the announcement of our new enhanced trilateral security partnership, AUKUS, designed to further the cause of peace, stability and security in the Indo-Pacific region for the benefit of all who live within that region. It is essential that countries pursue these interests in ways that are mutually respectful and support stability and security, because we want to maintain an open, rules-based international system that supports peace, prosperity, human dignity and the aspirations of all sovereign nations. A global order where sovereign nations can flourish free from coercion because of collaborative and purposeful action that enables them to correspond and engage in a fellowship that is supported by a rules-based order, rules that have underpinned regional peace and prosperity, such as through the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea and the Treaty for the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which we affirm as Australians and which we will always honour. We must reinforce a sustainable rules-based order while ensuring it is also adaptable to the great power realities of our time. The United Nations must continue to reinforce the international rules-based order and preserve the institutions that uphold that order and ensure they're effective as the mechanisms for dialogue and adjudication that buttress and hold together this all-important order. Australia also values the rules and institutions that foster international trade, which creates wealth and brings nations together and is vital to our recovery from the economic costs of this pandemic. Finally, Mr. President, Australia is determined to play our part in meeting the global challenge of climate change as the world makes the transition to a net zero global energy economy, a new energy economy. Australia has a proven track record when it comes to setting, achieving and exceeding our commitments to responsibly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We exceeded our Kyoto commitments. Our emissions in the year to March 2021 were 21% below 2005 levels. That is a strong record of achievement, and it's been achieved by Australians right across our community, our businesses, individual households, small businesses, our institutions, our governments. In Australia, we already have the world's highest uptake of rooftop solar, and we're deploying renewable energy at nearly 8 times the global per capita average. We are well on the way to exceed our 2030 Paris commitment of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 26 to 28% below 2005 levels. We will meet it, and we will beat it, and we'll beat it strongly. And we are committing to achieving net zero emissions. My government, the Australian government, will release our long-term emissions reduction strategy ahead of the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow at COP26. We know the world is transitioning to a new energy economy. It's no longer about if, or even when for that matter, it's about how we achieve the reduction in global emissions, in our own emissions, in individual nations' emissions, while still lifting living standards across all nations. And the answer, as history has shown us time and time again, it's technology. Practical, scalable and commercially viable technologies. That's why we're investing around $20 billion to commercialise promising new technologies like clean hydrogen, green steel, long-duration energy storage and carbon capture, vital to meeting the global task to achieve net zero emissions. And we want to work with everyone, other countries, to commercialise these technologies and ensure they're scalable and accessible as soon as possible. This is critical for the good of developing countries, who we all know face the steepest challenge in reducing their emissions. Developing countries need job-creating investment in the same productive commercial technologies, energy technologies available to advanced economies like Australia. Australia is a reliable partner during this time of transition. We know that if we can support developing economies to embrace and use the technologies that achieve net zero emissions and see their economies grow and increase their jobs, that is not only wonderful for those economies and their peoples, but it also is good for Australia. We know that their success will also be our success. And so we are blessed here in this country with natural resources, including transition fuels and the resources needed for the new energy economy, and we will apply them. We will apply them in our region as we continue to work with our Southeast Asian partners and to assist them make their energy transitions successfully through finance, through trade and capability building. We have one global atmosphere, and it's in our shared interests to work with each other in this way. That's why we're helping other countries reduce their emissions and build resilience to climate change too. That's why we've set aside $1.5 billion in practical climate finance globally. And it will have a particular focus on our Pacific family, dealing directly. We're up for this global challenge. We're up for achieving net zero emissions, a challenge that we know will be met in partnership, and that unless we all get there, well, we will not achieve our goal. Mr. President, Australia has always sought to make a positive contribution to meeting global challenges. Our voice is clear, it's direct, it's respectful, it's constructive. It reflects our confidence in who we are and what we stand for. We are a proud liberal democracy. We believe in a world order that favours freedom, an order that was established through the fine institution of the United Nations that we gather around through these contributions, and that supports the dignity and free expression of all people. We believe in human rights, in gender equality and the rule of law, and we back that up with how we pursue these things in our own country, in our own society, and how we raise our own children. Australia was one of 8 countries only involved in the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we continue to strengthen the international human rights system. And we will continue to raise our voice on important issues like the rights of women and girls, the rights of Indigenous peoples, the global abolition of the death penalty, because respecting the rights and freedoms of the individual is intrinsically important. It is fundamental to our values as a people and as a nation. It lifts all societies and nations too, delivering better outcomes through economic inclusion, women's empowerment, environmental sustainability, rising living standards, and so much more. Australians' actions are guided by our belief in the inherent dignity of all people, everywhere, no matter the circumstances. Mr. President, we learned through the pandemic that every moment of challenge requires us to think anew, to engage with each other, to learn as you go. It is an experience understood by many others, and so we will continue to meet this moment with dialogue, with partnership. Thank you, Mr. President.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia for the statement just made. The Assembly will hear an address by His Highness Sheikh Sabah Khalid Al-Hamad Al-Sabah, Prime Minister of the State of Kuwait. May I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Highness Sheikh Sabah Khalid Al-Hamad Al-Sabah, Prime Minister of the State of Kuwait, and I invite him to address the General Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate, Your Excellency, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, President of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Majesties, Highnesses, Excellencies, Heads of Delegations, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace, mercy and blessing of Allah be upon you. It gives me great pleasure at the outset to congratulate you and the Republic of the Maldives on your election as President of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I assure you of our full support in all tasks that would facilitate your work. I would also like to seize the opportunity to express our sincere gratitude for the tremendous effort of your predecessor, His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkir, during his presidency of the 75th session. I should also like to congratulate His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres on his re-election as Secretary General of the United Nations, which is a recognition of his remarkable effort in leading this august organization during his first term. The last year of which has witnessed a multifaceted, grave challenge that has claimed countless lives and caused much material and moral damage. Mr. President, our world is still in deep mourning due to COVID-19, a pandemic of global reach and excessive destructive ability. It claims human lives without distinction. It sends successive shock waves that upend the core of modern lifestyles in their various humanitarian, political, economic, and environmental aspects. A quick glance at the figures and statistics recorded worldwide shows the magnitude of the scars that will remain present for a long time on our collective conscience. It shows casualties that have surpassed 4.5 million people and confirmed recorded cases exceeding 231 million cases, as well as the crippling burden placed on health sectors and professionals who deserve our greatest appreciation for their dedication and work in the front lines, despite the horrors that threatened the collapse of many health systems across the world. This is in addition to the exacerbation of the food insecurity crisis due to the disruption in supply lines, which came as an expected outcome of the severe economic downturn and stagnation, unheard of in over 90 years. Further, we saw a decline in the services of the education sector, in particular in developing and least developed countries, in such a way that threatens more than ever to reverse the gains made and waste achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. President, any study of history will show that epidemics, despite the gravity of their effects, have played pivotal roles as major catalysts for change and for building back better at the political, economic, and social levels. From this standpoint, the COVID-19 pandemic was like a mirror that reflected the world's weaknesses and revealed its chronic flaws, among which are the increase in hunger and poverty rates, prolonged conflicts, unchecked advances in modern technology with ramifications on cybersecurity, and the spread of the scourge of terrorism, as well as the mounting structural disparities and gaps among countries. All these challenges have put multilateralism to an existential test of survival or decline and stagnation. Perhaps one of the most positive changes brought about by the pandemic was the emergence of modern patterns of creativity, innovation, adaptation that have contributed to creating rapid responses and advanced forms of cooperation within societies and between countries. This is in addition to the breakthrough in scientific research that was manifested in the race to defeat the virus through the production of multiple vaccines that have proved their effectiveness in providing the required immunization empirically with encouraging figures. Yet, much hinges upon the ability of the international community to make optimal use of this crisis towards a better transformation for our world in a serious endeavor for sustainable and equitable recovery where no one is left behind. Mr. President, recovery requires starting with several steps, most important among which is giving utmost priority to investing in data and information infrastructure, as the availability of digital evidence will contribute to enhancing decision-making processes in the programs and policies aimed at mobilizing resources and post-crisis rebuilding in order to shield societies from similar future crises. However, the most important and urgent step is finding fair and secure distribution patterns of vaccines to all countries towards achieving universal immunization. In this regard, the state of Kuwait has achieved one of the highest global vaccination rates of 72% for our nationals and expatriates alike. We are also able to protect our health system from collapsing. My country continues to support international efforts to fight the COVID-19 pandemic with total contributions of $327.4 million, the latest of which was providing $40 million to the Gavi Alliance and the COVAX Facility Initiative towards enhancing global health security. Mr. President, the question of Palestine remains central to our Arab and Muslim worlds. Tension and instability will continue in our region if the Palestinian people do not obtain all their legitimate political rights, and if Israel, the occupying power, continues its practices and violations of international humanitarian law. These violations include the building of settlements, confiscation of land, closure of territories, the continued blockade on Gaza, and the desecration of the sanctity of holy places. We stress the importance of continuing to exert efforts to restart the negotiations within a set time frame towards a just and comprehensive peace, according to the terms of reference of the peace process, the resolutions of international legitimacy, and the Arab Peace Initiative, with a view to ending the Israeli occupation and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital along the borders prior to the 4th of June 1967, and the return of the refugees. At the same time, we commend the indispensable role of UNRWA in providing basic assistance to millions of Palestinian refugees and stress the importance of continuing to support its work. Mr. President, the ongoing Syrian crisis, which has entered its 11th year, with all the humanitarian suffering for Syrians inside and outside the country, has proved that the absence of international consensus and will, as well as external intervention, have all prolonged this brutal conflict. Here we reiterate our principled conviction that there is no military solution to the crisis. We emphasize the importance of reaching a political settlement in accordance with relevant Security Council resolutions, especially Resolution 2254, in a way that meets the aspirations and hopes of the brotherly Syrian people. Mr. President, the continuing crisis in brotherly Yemen and the growing and dangerous threats it poses to regional peace and stability are testament to how relevant Security Council resolutions and outcomes are addressed in practice. Hence, we stress our firm position that the only solution to this crisis is a political one, based on the three agreed-upon terms of reference, namely the GCC initiative and its implementation mechanism, the outputs of the National Dialogue Conference, and the resolutions of the Security Council, especially Resolution 2216. We also renew our support to the Special Envoy of the Secretary General to Yemen. At the same time, we welcome the constructive role of the sisterly Kingdom of Saudi Arabia towards the implementation of the Riyadh Agreement, as well as its initiative for peace in Yemen. We express our condemnation of all aggressions and attacks against Saudi territory and reaffirm our support to all measures taken by the Kingdom to maintain its security and stability. Mr. President, the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum election earlier this year of a head and deputies for its Presidency Council, as well as of a Prime Minister, is an encouraging sign that the international community, through the UN, is able to make headway towards a difficult peace that was elusive due to 7 years of severe institutional divisions with serious repercussions on the security and stability of Libya and countries in the region. We call upon our Libyan brothers to give priority to the best interest of the country, as well as peaceful solutions that reject violence. They must commit to the outcomes of international conferences and relevant Security Council resolutions to ensure concluding all necessary arrangements for holding the general elections on time on the 24th of December 2021. We expect that these efforts and arrangements would ensure the security, stability, and unity of Libya and meet the aspirations of the brotherly people of Libya. Mr. President, the pandemic has had political, social, and economic repercussions that diverted the attention of the world, which was exploited by extremist and terrorist groups in conflict-affected or fragile and insecure areas. The Middle East, in particular, has suffered from the destruction and sabotage of terrorist organizations, mainly the ISIL terrorist organization. This led to an intensification of the war on this clear and present danger in all its forms and manifestations, as we work to dry up its funding and implement international and regional counterterrorism conventions. Many countries in our region are suffering from this growing threat: in Yemen, Libya, Syria, Somalia, and Iraq. The international community has followed with much interest the critical recent developments in Afghanistan. We call upon the Taliban and all parties to exercise utmost restraint to protect lives, and also to provide full protection for civilians. We also call upon them to strictly adhere to obligations and international law, to maintain stability and security in the country, and to uphold the rights and gains of the friendly people of Afghanistan. At the regional level, based on our principled position rooted in the rules of good neighborliness set forth in the Charter of the United Nations, we reiterate our call to the Islamic Republic of Iran to take serious steps towards confidence building in a dialogue based on respect for the sovereignty of states and non-interference in their domestic affairs, towards diffusing tension in the Gulf and maintaining the safety, security, and freedom of maritime navigation from any threats. This would contribute towards establishing relations based on mutual respect and cooperation, which paves the way for the realization of the aspirations of the peoples of the region towards security, stability, prosperity, and development. I turn to a thorny regional question. The erosion of the nuclear disarmament regime is an existential threat to the security and stability of the region. We look forward to the concerted international and regional efforts towards the successful holding of the second session of the Conference on Establishing a Nuclear Weapons and WMDs Free Zone in the Middle East, which the State of Kuwait will preside over, to be held in New York in November 2021. Mr. President, the current COVID-19 pandemic continues to deprive countries of the gains made towards the SDGs. It has shown that different aspects of sustainability are interlinked. Hence, the issue of climate change and ecosystems was also subject to its waves. In this regard, we expect the UN Climate Change Conference to be held in Glasgow next month to reach a constructive review, to track progress made and identify shortcomings based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibility towards ending environmental degradation exacerbated by marked increases in temperatures, severe storms, and floods, as well as deforestation due to fires in a number of countries, which would have severe environmental repercussions. In conclusion, I reiterate our adherence to the international multilateral system and to the principles and purposes of the United Nations Charter to ensure the development and strengthening of international governance, to guarantee the realization of the noble mission of the UN towards the maintenance of international peace and security, and to serve all of mankind. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the State of Kuwait for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Ana Brnabić, Prime Minister of the Republic of Serbia. May I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming Her Excellency Ana Brnabić, Prime Minister of the Republic of Serbia. I invite her to address the General Assembly.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I have the great honor to address you today on behalf of the citizens of the Republic of Serbia. Esteemed Excellencies, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, Mr. Volkan Bozkır, and Mr. Antonio Guterres, I would like to thank you for the active engagement, dedication, and leadership you have shown for the United Nations and all of humanity during these difficult times. Serbia shares your conviction, and we remain fully committed to supporting your efforts. This year, we come together at a decisive moment in our history. COVID-19 has shaken our foundations to the core. At the same time, we are increasingly witnessing and experiencing the effects of climate change. And finally, we are seeing significant shifts in global partnerships and alliances, trade wars between traditional partners and allies, protectionism instead of openness and free market policies, and overall uncertainty at an unprecedented scale. Some of the pressing and extremely emotional issues that we have locally in the Balkans are still unresolved, and while we are trying, and Serbia is especially dedicated to this, to change the future by working together and creating alliances through initiatives such as the Berlin Process and Open Balkans Initiative, others are trying to disrupt these processes, and instead of focusing on the future, they want to recreate the past, whatever the cost of that may be. But let me start with COVID. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed critical weaknesses in the architecture of global governance. It has threatened to erase the progress many nations have achieved in recent years. It has placed nations at the junction between isolation and collaboration, between panic and hope, between chaos and order. The pandemic questioned some of the basic tenets of the open and cooperative international order. Global exchanges, international communication, and cross-border trade have all seen a vast decrease. Curfews, restrictions on freedom, and lockdowns of entire societies have created uncertainty in many segments of the individual lives of our citizens, and for that matter, our own individual perception of what freedom in today's world even means. For Serbia, this pandemic threatened to undermine everything we have been doing for the past 7 years, to crush all of the results and accomplishments of difficult reforms we initiated in 2014, and to propel us back to the times of high unemployment, rising public debt, uncontrollable deficit, and overall desperation. Much as in any other country, COVID-19 has tested our nation's resiliency. And this time, unlike during the global financial crisis, which was still much more limited in scope and incomparable in consequences to the COVID-19 pandemic, this time Serbia stood strong. The reforms we undertook in the pre-COVID times made us more resilient than ever. The fiscal consolidation, the budget surplus we had, efficient and predictable investment environment became a lifeline that saved us from a recession during the pandemic, and one that ensured we could support our citizens and our economy during these most difficult of times. Despite the effects of the crisis, Serbia has managed to preserve financial and economic stability. In 2020, we recorded a decline in GDP of only 0.9%, one of the best results in Europe. Our public debt remained below 60% of our GDP, average salary continued to grow by almost 10%, while despite the pandemic, the number of people employed increased by over 3%. The recovery this year has been stronger than we expected. Our GDP will grow approximately 7% and perhaps by even more. Prior to the pandemic, we have opened our borders to investment, technology, and ideas, and we managed to create a peaceful and stable environment that allowed us to pursue rapid domestic transformation with innovation and knowledge-based economy as the foundation. The innovative advances we have made allowed us to diversify our capabilities when the virus hit, through e-government, online education, digital textbooks, and a central software system which drove a successful vaccination rollout. We invested heavily in healthcare infrastructure and strengthened the health system in order to respond to the current crisis, and are eternally grateful to our healthcare workers for their dedicated struggle. Our decision to put geopolitics aside and people at the center of our policies is the reason we were able to acquire vaccines quicker than most other nations. We did not discriminate between manufacturers, did not care whether vaccines are from the East or West, but chose to negotiate with all vaccine manufacturers deemed safe by regulators. This openness gave us the ability to purchase vaccines from around the world, giving our citizens the unique freedom to choose which vaccine they prefer. Excellencies, Serbia believes in solidarity between nations, multilateralism, and helping others when in need. Since the beginning of this year, we have made it our mission to support our neighbors and all those in need with COVID-19 vaccines. We have also allowed foreign nationals to come to Serbia to receive the vaccine which will protect their lives. In total, Serbia has donated or allocated over 1 million doses of vaccines, 230,000 doses for the region, 300,000 doses for foreign nationals who came to Serbia to get vaccinated, and an additional 570,000 doses for countries of Africa and Asia. And we will keep doing so to the greatest extent possible until COVID-19 is behind all of us. This is why we have also taken steps to acquire the technology to produce at least 2 types of vaccines to help improve global access so we can all be safe and triumph over this virus. However, as stated by dignitaries of some of the largest nations during this General Assembly, there are other pressing issues that all of us need to keep addressing without any delay and in a bold manner. And the most urgent is climate change. Serbia has redoubled its efforts to make our country safer and cleaner for its citizens, and by doing so, contribute to the fight against climate change and for environmental protection. We are strongly committed to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement on climate change. We are committed to global efforts and will continue to work actively to meet our obligation under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. We are about to submit our revised nationally determined contributions to contribute to this critical global effort. We have already announced our intention to reduce greenhouse gases by at least 33.3% compared to 1990 and 13.2% compared to 2010, which we are currently incorporating into our energy and climate strategic documents. We work strategically on planning and investments in this sector. These investments are extremely expensive, requiring years and decades of commitment and a systematic approach. But we are firmly set on the path of this transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, of all the challenges we face, the most worrisome for Serbia is the maintenance of peace and stability in the southern Serbia province of Kosovo and Metohija. For more than 2 decades, we have been constantly drawing international attention to the problems that the non-Albanian population is facing in Kosovo and Metohija. Physical safety and respect for and protection of human rights, and especially of minority communities, are far from satisfactory. We are now witnessing a constant increase in the number of attacks targeting Serbs, their property, and religious heritage in Kosovo and Metohija. To illustrate, there were 55 such incidents in 2014, 62 in 2016, 71 in 2020, and 100 since the beginning of this year. The total number of attacks in 2020 was already surpassed by June of this year. According to the United Nations, Kosovo and Metohija is still the territory with the least number of returnees, internally displaced Serbs, of all post-conflict areas in the entire world. I will give you just a few examples to depict what the lives of Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija look like today. On the 11th of May, the house of Radoje Pumpalović, 81-year-old returnee to Kosovo in the village of Dubrava in the Istok municipality, was attacked. This was the 5th attack on him in the same year. And again, I emphasize, he's 81 years old. Since June 2021, multiple attacks were carried out against Dragica Gašić, a 59-year-old woman, the first Serb returnee to Đakovica, 22 years after the end of the conflict. Attacks include stoning of her apartment, banning her from shopping for food in the local store, and petitions by civil society organizations demanding her eviction from the city. On the 2nd of July, in the village of Gojbulja, near Vučitrn, a group of Albanians attacked 13-year-old Nikola Perić. The attack occurred when he was returning home from the school playground with 3 friends. Attacks on Serbian medieval churches, monasteries, and monuments in Kosovo and Metohija make them some of the most endangered cultural heritage sites in Europe. The monastery Visoki Dečani was recently listed by Europa Nostra as one of the 7 most endangered heritage sites in Europe in 2021. The advisory panel of Europa Nostra noted that Dečani is the only monument in Europe under robust military protection for a continuous period of 20 years, although it constitutes a monument of ultimate historical and cultural importance for Europe and the world. This spiral of violence occurring in Kosovo and Metohija culminated at the beginning of this week. On the pretext of enforcing new license plate rules, Pristina dispatched heavily armed special units to the north of province. This is yet another brutal violation of the Brussels Agreement, and this irrational show of force has ignited a major crisis. It disrupted the supply of food and medication to Serb communities in the north of the province. Local Serbs, who peacefully gathered to protest this measure, were met with tear gas and police brutality, thus seriously threatening local and regional stability. But despite all of the challenges and daily provocations, Serbia remains strongly committed to finding a compromise-based solution that will ensure lasting peace and stability. Dialogue and the implementation of the agreements reached are the only proper way to resolve all open issues. However, almost 9 years after reaching the Brussels Agreement, as the first agreement on normalization between Belgrade and Pristina, the establishment of the Community of Serb Municipalities, the very backbone of this agreement, has not yet even begun. And I would like to appeal once again to the international community and especially to the European Union as the guarantor of the Brussels Agreement to firmly insist that the provisional institutions of self-government in Pristina start implementing all of the agreements reached. The Republic of Serbia, by defending its sovereignty and territorial integrity, at the same time defends international law, the UN Charter, the legally binding UN Security Council Resolution 1244, and the supreme authority of the Security Council when it comes to the preservation of international peace and stability. We attach special importance to the activity of the UN mission in Kosovo and Metohija and expect it to continue to implement its mandate in the province in accordance with this resolution. Dear friends, our generation shares the common destiny of the modern world, which is becoming increasingly complex in terms of geopolitics, technology, health, and climate. In the face of these challenges, Serbia will continue nurturing international partnerships on a predictable and transparent basis. We will continue pursuing rule of law reforms on our EU path, which is our strategic foreign policy goal. We see this as inseparable from achieving sustainable peace, stability, and prosperity. We will host, together with the Republic of Azerbaijan, as the current chair of the non-aligned movement, a commemorative high-level event marking the 60th anniversary of the non-aligned movement conference, which was held in Belgrade in 1961. And we are very much looking forward to hosting our friends from all parts of the world in Belgrade in October this year. We will further enhance cooperation across the Balkans through the Open Balkans Initiative and Berlin process, by opening borders, harmonizing differences, and further integrating our region. And in conclusion, over the past 7 years, Serbia has been transformed. We sparked an economic revival, created opportunities for young people, cultivated a tech boom, and improved Serbia's position abroad. The progress we have made has allowed Serbia to better face and survive the pandemic. The world now faces a turning point. The recovery from COVID-19 and sustainable reconstruction will not proceed if issues, new and old, are not handled by joint forces and collaborative international actions. This pandemic taught us one important lesson. Unless all of us are safe, no one is safe. So we can either win together, or all of us, regardless of how rich or poor, large or small, from Europe, Asia, Africa, America, or Australia, or fail together. If anything, the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the issue of climate change, should have taught us to stand together. Thank you very much.
Au nom de l'Assemblée générale,
on behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Republic of Serbia for the statement just made. I ask protocol to accompany Her Excellency. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark to introduce the Statement by the Head of Government.
The honour and privilege of introducing a pre-recorded statement by Her Excellency Mrs. Mette Frederiksen, Prime Minister of Denmark.
Mr. President, dear delegates, no one can be in doubt. We live in a connected world. We face global challenges. They can only be solved if we work together. COVID-19, human rights violations, climate change, poverty on the rise, conflicts. As a founding member of the UN, Denmark is a strong voice for common solutions. And today we need global cooperation more than ever. Throughout history, international solidarity has moved us forward. It has the power to do so again. Out of the pandemic, we must ensure global access to vaccines. None of us can leave COVID behind until all of us can. Denmark is committed to vaccine solidarity and COVAX. In the spring, we announced the donation of 3 million vaccine doses. This week, we announce a redoubling of our efforts. We now aim to donate more than 6 million doses. That is more than one donated vaccine for each Dane. It comes in addition to our commitment to COVAX with more than $15 million. If we are to battle this pandemic, we have to strengthen our ability to prevent and respond to future pandemics. International solidarity also has the power to prevent a climate disaster. The latest IPCC report makes it clear that we are standing at a global crossroad. We must continue our path towards a green future, and we have to do it faster. We need to keep the Paris Agreement goal alive, limiting the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Climate change hits the world's poorest and weakest communities hardest. Denmark will respond to the call of the Secretary General and massively scale up Danish grant-based climate finance to at least $500 million a year by 2023. And we are dedicating 60% to adaptation in poor and vulnerable countries. In addition, we are strengthening our efforts to mobilize public and private finance from other sources. In total, Denmark aims to contribute at least 1% of the collective target of $100 billion. At the same time, we are fully focused on reducing our own emissions. Denmark will be climate neutral no later than 2050. And by 2030, we have committed to cut our greenhouse gas emissions by 70%. We have decided to end production of oil and gas and build the world's first energy island. In time, they will create clean energy for millions of European households. We call on you all to follow and to do so urgently. Every one of us needs to act and adapt, but we also have to act for the common good. That is the case in Afghanistan as well. The current situation is disturbing for the long-suffering people of Afghanistan, for the women and children, and also for the international society. We need a strong and coordinated response. The contribution at the International Donor Conference last week was an important step. I would like to express my appreciation for the commitment of our international humanitarian partners. They are providing life-saving assistance in Afghanistan and in the many other places. Thank you. Peace missions are keeping peace, preventing conflicts, and paving the way for progress every day around the world. No people in conflict zones should be forgotten. We must include those that have been excluded and empower those